All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Realities. We've got an action-packed show today. We have on the panel today, we have Irina Slav from Bulgaria. How are you this morning, Irina?
Great, thank you, Stu.
And then we have the Tammy Nemeth. She is tired. She just flew in from Canada. Welcome, Tammy, from the UK.
Hello, good morning.
And then we have the David Blackmon. I mean, he is the energy absurdity guru. How are you, sir?
I'm tan, rested, and ready to go, bud.
And we have a special guest today, one of my all-time energy heroes, Robert Bryce, host of the Power Hungry podcast. Thank you, Robert.
Yay. Hi, glad to be with y'all.
I'll tell you what, we are going to have an absolute blast. We're going to have a little bit of the run of show right here. We have, I'm going to show a 30-second clip as we get started on Juice, the series. And Robert, what's the website?
Difficult to keep it.
JuiceTheSeries.com. Did I mention JuiceTheSeries.com? I hope I mentioned JuiceTheSeries.com.
And let me just show this real quick intro. I thought this was a critical piece, Robert. I hope you don't mind.
Stable, more difficult to provide power in a reliable manner, more expensive, can game it by taking a couple plants offline and watching the clearing price soar. Taking plants offline in the old grid didn't do you any good. In the new grid, it does.
That new grid Meredith's talking about wasn't designed to prioritize consumers. The old grid, the one built by people like Edison, Insull, and others, ensured reliability because if electricity isn't reliable, it's not affordable.
You know, Robert, as we go through and the team asks you questions and things, we really are excited about your first movie and then the series. Can you tell us a little bit about the 3-year journey you had on how you got to this series and what it's about?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on. I admire all the work that all of you are doing. So glad to be with you. Just a brief history. So the first project my colleague Tyson Culver and I made is Juice, How Electricity Explains the World, which was a feature-length documentary that came out in 2019. And I thought I was done making documentaries because they just take too long. They cost too much. There's just a ton of friction. But then we were blacked out. I live in Austin, Texas, and we were blacked out in 2021, almost exactly 3 years ago. And in the wake of that blackout we lost power for 2 days. Tyson lost both power and water. We understood, and, Bill Magnus, from the former head of ERCOT, said that the ERCOT grid was within 4 or 5 minutes of total collapse. And so I realized on a personal basis, there was something here for me that I needed to tell this story. I was uniquely positioned to explain why the grid has been, one, the importance of the electric grid. Second, why it has become so fragilized. And third, what we need to do to fix it. So those were the things that motivated me to do it. I'm not being falsely, I was called to make this project. And rather than make an 80-minute feature, as we did in the first film, we made a 5-episode series, each episode about 20 minutes. They're free. They're available on YouTube. We want to change the conversation. We want to call attention to the electric grid, its importance, and all these misplaced incentives that are now in place that are weakening the grid rather than strengthening it. So that's the brief background.
Oh, fantastic. And David, you had a few questions there too.
Yeah, Robert, I was blacked out for 5 days during Winter Storm Uri in 2021 in Mansfield, Texas. One of the striking aspects of Juice, Power Politics, and the Grid, to me, was the reminder that the way our grid works now was essentially structured by one company back about 25 years ago, Enron.
Yeah.
Enron.
Yeah.
Provided the model for how the U.S. grid operates today. Talk about that aspect of things.
Sure. Well, so I've written 6 books. I'm not bragging. I've written 6 books. My first book was on Enron, and now it's 22 years ago. It's hard to believe, but true. And here, all these years later, I'm still writing about Enron. But Enron had a big impact on the energy sector. It had a big impact on the power sector. And Enron successfully promoted this idea that electricity can be traded just like natural gas, right? Enron was very successful in the George H.W. Bush administration in getting natural gas deregulated. And I think that was a very positive thing. But the assumption was that we could treat electricity just as we treat gas. Well, it's not the same thing. Electricity is not a commodity; it's a service. But Enron was successful in getting the electric market in Britain deregulated. Then they went to California, and then they came to Texas. And in all three places, they had the support of both the conservatives and the liberals, because the conservatives could say, "Well, we're for free markets," and the liberals could say, "Oh, great! Then solar and wind are going to be able to compete in the market, and everything's going to be hunky dinky." Well, as we know now, and particularly after the Winter Storm Uri, in the wake of that, everyone said, well, who's responsible for reliability? And everyone said, well, no one's responsible for reliability. The market failed. Well, who created the market? A bunch of lawyers. And why are they lawyers? Because they couldn't do the math to get into engineering school. So we're in this situation where we have our most important energy networks. Ultimately, there's no one in charge of reliability, and it's not everywhere in the country, but across big parts of the country, we've got this idea that, electricity should just be treated as any kind of other commodity, like orange juice or grape nut cereal or something else. It's fundamentally different. And so that specter of Enron, it still haunts our electricity system today. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to address because the complexity of the system has become so enormous.
So one of the things in January, we had this cold snap in Texas, which was really a pale comparison to Uri.
Yeah.
But it was a pretty significant cold snap, and the grid did fine, got through it, didn't have disruptions in natural gas flows like we had during Uri. Wind and solar did okay. They failed when you expect them to fail, and, supplied some electricity when you expected them to. So that's all great too. But does that mean our grid's fixed in Texas? Don't we still have some pretty significant problems we have to address?
No, we aren't. I don't think it has been fixed. And I think more, let's zoom out just from Texas to more broadly across the U.S. What I see, and I'm pro natural gas, but our system is becoming too reliant on one fuel, and that is natural gas.
Yeah.
Now, that has helped reduce CO2 emissions because we're displacing coal. Well, that's fine. And that's one you could argue, okay, well, that's a positive outcome. But the problem is, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and North American Electric Reliability Corporation have pointed this out many times, the electric grid and the gas grid are now interdependent and codependent. And so we're becoming too dependent on one fuel. And that's a real problem. And we saw during Winter Storm Elliott, now a year ago Christmas, the entire gas grid in New York City almost failed. Well, that would have been catastrophic. So what the punchline here of all of these things that we're talking about is we're ignoring the fragility and the importance of these key energy networks at our extreme peril. And we need to pay attention. We need to wake up, because if these systems fail, the results will be catastrophic.
Yeah. And so what's the most viable option other than natural gas? This is my last question.
Sure.
What's the most viable option?
Well, I mean, our film is adamantly pro-nuclear. Now, I'm not going to suggest that this is easy. It's not going to be quick. It's not going to be cheap. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take sustained effort to bring nuclear back in America. We also, in our fourth episode, we go to Canada and we point out Canada now, and it's very clear, and even since the film came out, Canada's going to lead the world in the new nuclear renaissance. There's just no doubt about it, because they have all the things in place that they need. They have strong governmental support. They have the workforce. They have their own unique reactor design. And I also think Eastern Europe, and Irina can, of course, talk more knowledgeably about that than I can, but the Eastern European countries have far more motivation to adopt new nuclear than the U.S. does. Of course, because it's lack of supplies of natural gas, but also nat gas there in Europe is 4 or 5 times the cost of gas here in the U.S. So there are many reasons why the U.S. should be moving toward nuclear, but I think we are going, if I'm very sober about it, very candid about it, we're going to lag many parts of the rest of the world because we're not under the same kind of pressure other countries are.
Irina, what do you think about nuclear in Europe, as Robert was saying?
Robert is absolutely right, because Eastern European countries are being pressured to decarbonize as fast as possible, which means shutting down our coal power plants. And the only way to replace this generation capacity with anything reliable is not wind and solar, it's nuclear. And we have no problem with nuclear, unlike Germans. So it just makes sense, even though it's really expensive. the upfront costs are really, really high, especially for poorer economies. But we already have some nuclear in Bulgaria, in Romania. Poland is going big on nuclear as well. And this is because of European Union pressure. I was going to ask you, Robert, about coal. Everybody hates coal. It's dirty, etc. But you said that the US grid has become extremely reliant on natural gas. Do you see a future for coal?
Well, yes, I do. Unfortunately, I think that future is going to be continuing declining market share. In my view, we should keep all of the coal plants we have right now open,
Right.
but to assure reliability. And we have had different RTOs, regional transmission organizations across the U.S. saying we need these resources. In fact, there's a big battle on in PJM, in the eastern U.S., over a very specific coal plant called Bonham Shores in Maryland. It's 1,200 megawatts, and PJM said we need this plant for reliability, but the plant is being shut down by its owner because it's being sued by the Sierra Club. So we're seeing cases where it's very clear that the coal plants are needed for reliability. There was another report just recently from MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, talking about the premature shuttering of these thermal plants and how important they are to energy security, and yet they're being shut down anyway. So, I would put it this way, Irina, is one, we need those plants for reliability and affordability. But second, it makes no sense for the United States to think that we're going to solve the climate challenge by ourselves when in 2022, China was permitting 2 new coal plants a week. China now has 1.25 terawatts or 1.2 terawatts of installed coal-fired capacity. That's equal to the entire installed generation capacity of the United States grid. And they're building 300,000 megawatts of new coal. So, this idea that somehow there's this hubris in the West that we're going to solve this issue, it's wrong. Climate change is a concern. It is not our only concern.
Great point.
Yeah, well said.
Tammy, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting you talk about coal because during the first energy crisis, it was a matter of switching over oil-fired power to coal.
Right.
Because it was about energy diversification. They
Sure.
wanted to do kind of like China is now, where everything is on the grid. So, China's producing the wind and solar and all the coal and the natural gas and the nuclear and more hydro, and they're tampering a little bit with geothermal. So they're doing all of the above. And meanwhile, Canada, for example, there's the province of Saskatchewan that has 3 coal-fired plants. They don't produce all that much, and they're supposed to shut by 2030.
Right.
And in a province that doesn't have access to very good hydro, it's flat, it's dry. And the solution that Ottawa is saying is build wind and solar. But, we have a lot of coal. The coal plants are built on the coal seam.
Right.
And, it's reliable. And I really liked your point in the documentary series there that diversification is really important. Japan is doing diversification. So, and then I think of how there's the clean coal technology.
Yeah.
So it's possible to do the scrubbing, to do all that, to reduce the amount of emissions. And it all it does is make the grid more fragile. And yeah, so that's just my little comment about that. But I really enjoyed how you presented that case, that we can't just be reliant on natural gas. We can't just be reliant on renewables. I'm a little concerned that people will get dependent on nuclear, which has its own issues. But
Sure.
yeah, do you think
in the series, I'll just add one quick point, and that is that Meredith Angwin calls it the fatal trifecta, which is just a great formulation. And she says, and what is that fatal trifecta? She says it's over-reliance on renewables, it's over-reliance on just-in-time gas, and over-reliance on imports. And so during Winter Storm Uri, of course, Texas can't import much electricity from anywhere else. We're kind of an island in ERCOT. But we had, I'm pro natural gas, but it's a just-in-time fuel, and that's different from having coal, a big stack of coal out in the yard, or having even an oil tank full of oil where you can fire that up, or in the case of nuclear plants, having uranium on site. But it's absolutely critical to understand what you're saying, Tammy, and this diversification is absolutely key. And it's, you have to, if you're going to talk about energy security, it's required that you quote Churchill. And Churchill said in like 1906 or whatever, energy security depends on variety and variety alone. Now, he was talking about oil and Persia and the British Navy, but yeah, you need diverse supplies of energy to assure energy security, and we're losing that.
Yeah.
Robert, as your documentary title is also regulatory, and we're getting some other great questions in here, and we'll get to those here in a second. I have to hand it to the current administration's energy policies. They really are truly agnostic. They're obnoxious to all forms of energy. We have 24,000, whatever the number is, of projects to attach to the grid. And do you see any, as your title says, is there any hope for political solving legislation through regulatory actions coming around the corner? What do you see there?
Sure. Well, you're right. It's in our title, Juice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. And the politics of the grid are, and I think Meredith or Emmett Penny, who's also does a great job on the film. He talks about the physical grid and the policy grid and the political grid, right? These are things that affect that policy. But I think that the key thing to remember here, Stu, is that the politics are happening at the local, state, and federal levels, right? So you have such, policies that, like in California, where you have over 70 communities banning the use of natural gas and saying they're going to electrify everything. So that's one impact on the grid. And then you have net zero policies at local levels. And then you have the states deciding some of these things. And then you have state level regulators with their public utility commissions. And then you have at the federal level, you have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then you have all these other different federal agencies, whether it's the DOE, Environmental Protection Agency, or others that are also having a political effect on the grid. So all of these things have to be looked at as a whole, and that makes this an incredibly difficult issue to address. But I'm very proud of the series. If I could pitch one specific episode, just to switch the focus for just a minute, it's episode 3, which is called Green Dreams. I'm from Oklahoma. I have deep roots in Oklahoma. I'm a member of the Cherokee tribe. My great uncle, Ernie Rapp, was a member of the Osage tribe. He was born in 1909 in Fairfax, Oklahoma. So he had a front row seat to the reign of terror in the 1920s, during which, there's conspiracy of white folks to kill Osage tribal members for their oil wealth and their land. And that's, of course, the focus of Martin Scorsese's new film, The Killers of the Flower Moon. So we went to Osage County many times, and our episode 3 focuses on the Osage tribe's battle with Enel over a wind project. It's the longest running legal battle over wind energy in American history. And in December, the tribe won a key victory in federal court in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, in fact, my hometown. And the judge ordered the removal of 84 wind turbines. It's an unprecedented legal ruling. And so I'm not going to say we anticipated the ruling, but we knew that was a great story. And I'm really happy with how it came out. So episode 3, Green Dreams, is one to make sure not to miss. And did I mention juicetheseries.com? I hope I mentioned juicetheseries.com, where the 5 episodes of the documentary are all free. Juicetheseries.com.
Maybe you should also mention your Substack, Robert, which is also tremendous.
Well, thank you. I write almost exclusively on Substack now, and I love Substack. RobertBryce.substack.com. Thank you, David.
And we all have some pretty cool Substacks, especially Irina, David, and keeping in there. Hey, Irina, David, and Tammy, there's some great comments coming in, and if you can see them in the pick some of the questions coming in, and anybody want to snag a question, put it up there and talk about it with Robert.
Well, I thought this one was good, Robert, and I think it's something you probably would want to respond to from Tom Mumford about the climate change concern. And,
sure. Well, I understand the concern about this, and there is a lot of money. Let me be very clear. A lot of money. There are hundreds of millions of dollars that are going in through 501c3s, 501c4s to push the issue around climate change. And so my view on it is, okay, climate change is a concern. We need to pay attention to this, but we cannot ignore these other issues. climate change is a concern. It's not our only concern. We also have to be very clear about the reliability, affordability, and resilience of our energy and power systems. So can we make efforts to decarbonize? Yes, we can. And we are making some progress there, but we cannot ignore the issue, particularly of affordability and reliability, because they go hand in hand. I said at the end of the first episode, that if the electricity isn't affordable, if it's not reliable, it's not affordable. Look at Generac sales, right? Standby generator sales here in the United States. They're booming. Yeah. Well, who is the average buyer? You can look at their investor relations materials and find out, well, who's their average buyer? The average household income of a Generac buyer is $145,000 a year. That's more than twice the national average, the national median. So who gets hurt by unreliable energy? Who gets hurt by unaffordable energy? It's the poor and the middle class, and they are not getting any attention in these discussions when it comes to climate change. So that's yes, we can pay attention to climate change and we can take action on climate change, but it has to be balanced against all these other needs in our society.
You know, Robert, disproportionately impacted communities are not getting any favors by regulatory actions. It's horrific.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. I spoke in New Orleans about 2 years ago, and it was right near the Superdome. And New Orleans is one of the poorest big cities in America. And before my presentation, I went and walked around the neighborhood around the Superdome. New Orleans is, it's parts of that town have been devastated. And I was looking around, walking through these neighborhoods that have been hit hard. They're poverty stricken. There are no Teslas in the hood. There are no EVs in the barrio. This is ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. And so I see a lot of this climate action as class warfare. And I think it's in many cases just that stark. And I think that warfare is in fact the right term. Rui Teixeira had a great piece on Substack a few months ago. He said the working class is not down with the energy transition. Of course they're not, because they look at all this and they think, I'm not, I can't afford a Tesla. If you're a carpenter, a bricklayer, a mason, and you're driving an F-150 or an F-250 or a Ram pickup or something, drive a Tesla. These are rich. These are virtue signaling vehicles for rich white Democrats, and that is the truth.
Yes.
Hey, David, you had with the energy absurdities of the day. You had a film. Would it be a good time here to show just a little bit of
sure.
this?
Why not? I think anytime's a good time to show this.
Tell us what's going on here. Right?
So this is from Portugal. Climate activists were blocking a road in one of the major cities there, and watch what happens. This is so awesome. They just say no.
This is not in Austin, is it? With Robert. This is Robert dragging them off. Just kidding. That's just a joke.
One of the major cities in Portugal. They're a lot less patient in Portugal than the Germans and Brits are with these people.
In Britain, you couldn't do that because you'd get arrested. You'd get charged with assault.
You mean the dragger would be arrested, Tammy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
That actually.
You can't touch. You can't do anything. It's considered assault.
Wow.
It might have something to do with being a wealthier or a poorer nation, because Portugal is among the poorer members of the European Union. And
these people
I try to imagine anyone trying to do this here in Bulgaria. They will not just be dragged off the road. They will be beaten.
I have to say, we don't have a big problem with it in Texas either.
Yeah. Maybe that's why they're not trying it, because they know what will happen.
Irina, when you say that, if I could just jump in, one of the things that pops into my head is something I haven't written about, but I will. Rob Henderson is an American. He has a new book out. It's called Troubled. And he's coined this term luxury beliefs. And that is something that it goes to the heart of what you're talking about there, is that in the West, in wealthy Western countries, we attached onto these luxury beliefs around, we can just ban internal combustion engine vehicles. We can ban gas stoves. Right. And who are the ones that are pressing these kinds of policies? They are not just the elites, the super elites, right? And on the East, coastal cities in non-governmental organizations that have massive budgets, but they are in fact luxury beliefs. You can't, as you say, in poorer countries, these ideas around blocking the roads. Are you kidding me? Get the hell out of my way.
Exactly. This is just not going to fly. It's a sense of, sorry,
No.
just very quickly. I love this term, luxury beliefs, because the only ones who can afford to have these beliefs are people who have never felt, shortage of anything in their lives, and especially young people.
Yeah.
Who have this urge to be on the right side of history, to be good, to do good, and they genuinely believe they are doing good by, throwing soup at a painting, or most recently, some jam on a bust of Queen Victoria or something.
Yeah, we can't run that.
They feel they're doing the right thing. They have no space in their heads for the idea that most people, including in their own countries, those wealthy Western countries, cannot afford to have these beliefs.
Yeah. And they've never faced deprivation, right? They've never had hardship, right? They've never wondered whether there's going to be enough butane or propane in the tank for them to cook dinner or whatever else. And so it's, I've had Jasper Machogu, who's a Kenyan farmer, on my podcast, and it's just, his view on this. He's just absolutely so dismissive of Western elites talking about climate change. He's saying, come to my village and deal with how we deal with our daily life, and you would change your mind. That's my view on these just stop oil soup throwing kids that are okay, fine. Here's your punishment. You go live in sub-Saharan Africa for 5 years and you're not allowed to use any hydrocarbons ever. And then report back and tell us how much you love it. I mean,
no one's taken just on his offer for, these internships in Kenya.
We got a great question from Pinchas. I hope I got your name right. Coal and LNG could still be a better alternative until Russia's threat is seriously addressed.
May I just say something? This viewer clearly has some very strong feelings towards Russia. Now, if Russia wanted to do something to Europe, it would do it. Okay?
Yeah, Russia has an economy.
Russia wants to trade. Russia has energy commodities to sell, and it's selling them. It's not stopping anyone from buying them. It's Europe that is stopping the imports. And they're struggling to ban Russian LNG because they've been taking it so much.
This brings up another question here. And I'm from Texas, Oklahoma, like Robert. Are we Tex Oaks or Oak Tex? And Mahai, I believe, France, living proof that over-reliance on nuclear isn't really a risk. I'm going to disagree with this one a bit, and I want everybody's opinion. France had a ballpark 50 nuclear reactors. They cut their maintenance in half. They had 25 of their reactors, ballpark. I need to fact check these numbers, but they had half the fleet working, but yet they're still selling electricity off. What are any thoughts on that? And hopefully answering that question. I'll put it and stir the pot up.
Well, they did have a bad case of bad maintenance, mismanagement of their nuclear fleet. And who was it? The nuclear energy expert, his name escapes me. He wrote a lot about this, explaining it in detail. Oh, come on, American guy with mustache. I'm so sorry.
Mark Nelson, maybe.
Right, thank you. Sorry, Mark, if you're watching. So he detailed this story of France trying to get off nuclear for some reason, probably to be greener than green.
Because the Sierra Club wants
it ended up, having to do some urgent repairs to be able to export nuclear energy to Germany, which was struggling because of its wind and solar buildup.
Well, in Germany, of course, makes the most interesting story in Europe, because what are they doing? They're burning more lignite, right? And they're expanding the Garzweiler lignite mine. I think it's RWE's project that they're expanding that lignite mine. And to expand it, they had to take down, wait for it, a wind project, right? So, you really can't make this up. But, I think ultimately, practical politics and practical energy issues are going to prevail. And we see that already in Europe, where what is happening in Europe is, and in Germany in particular, is they're looking around and they're saying, hey, we got to keep these lignite mines open. And in fact, we have to expand them. And I saw the same thing in Japan when I was there a year ago. What is happening in Japan today? Well, TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, the company that owns Fukushima Daiichi, they're finishing 2 ultra supercritical coal plants on Tokyo Bay. All in, Japan is building 7 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity and gas-fired capacity, about 5 gigawatts of gas and 2 gigawatts of coal. So ultimately, energy security is going to win out, and it may take a while, but I think that's what I see, and I hope that's what happens here in the United States when it comes to the electric grid. But I think we're still a very long way from that.
I think Tom, Irina, I think you're correct. I think the West and Russia have much more in common than differences. I wish past biases would open eyes to new possibilities. I believe this was.
Well, I agree, yeah, but there's some very, very bad blood politically. So,
yeah,
too big a topic to go into.
I wanted to comment on, Robert, you had a recent Substack about the role of philanthropies and these foundations in funding a lot of the activism, and what a problem that is. And I think about how Bloomberg had his Beyond Coal campaign, and now he's got his Beyond Natural Gas and Beyond Petrochemicals.
Right.
So the shift of all that money, and it's not just Bloomberg, there's about 32 major American foundations, and there's a couple European ones thrown in there that fund almost all of this activism. And I'm what do you think is their ultimate goal? What do they want out of this? Why are they doing it?
So you're talking about the billionaires or the NGOs themselves?
The billionaires.
Or both?
The billionaires.
Well, fair enough. So, let me just talk about the NGOs themselves, or what I call the anti-industry industry, right? There, I mean, this is a very powerful. Exactly. It's a very powerful sector of the economy, and it is a sector on its own. I calculated that their annual revenues are on the order of $4.5 billion per year. So they're a bureaucracy just like any other. And what is the first motivation of a bureaucracy? It's to maintain the bureaucracy, right? So you have a whole lot of people who are elites who live in San Francisco. Let's be clear where these people live: San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C., and they work for these nonprofit entities. And what's their first concern is they may make sure they maintain their own job, because they're making nice salaries, several $100,000 a year if you're at the top of some of these organizations. So what do? Well, let's pass some policy. Let's push some policy, because then if we get the policy in place, we get more checks from our rich donors. But as far as the motivations for the billionaires themselves, Tammy, I think Martin Luther would recognize a lot of this. I mean, let's be clear, carbon credits. I mean, these are indulgences. Jeff Bezos's yacht has a yacht. I mean, and he's one of the biggest CO2 emitters in the world, right? So he's giving money. Same with Bloomberg. He has 12 or 14 houses. This is his kind of carbon get out of jail free card. I mean, I'm not going to, presume to know exactly what his motivation is, but these are all these billionaires that are funding this. They're all Democrats. They all have more money than they know what to do with. And so I think this is their way of saying, oh, well, we're concerned about climate change, while they sail around the world on their yachts. Laureen Powell Jobs is one of them. She has an enormous yacht and an enormous carbon footprint. It's been documented. She's one of the big funders of this whole, the Climate Imperative Foundation is one of the key funders of a lot of this electrify everything push. So, these are very, very powerful people. And regardless of who is in the White House, these NGOs are going to continue to push their policies, which in many cases I think are in fact a national security threat. And I made that point a week ago in Washington at the NARUC conference. I gave the keynote there, and I said, if Osama bin Laden or a similar terrorist was saying they want to shut down 40% of all the electricity generation in America and do it in the next 5 years, they would be viewed as a national security threat, and they would be investigated by the top security people in America. But because it's Michael Bloomberg saying this, and that is his stated goal, it's crickets.
Wow.
But thank you for making that point, because I think there's a disconnect between having a reliable and affordable, secure energy and national security. And people have forgotten that. And maybe Japan is taking the actions it is because it feels threatened. Does America not feel threatened? And that's why it's people aren't thinking of it that way?
Well, it's interesting to think about Japan. And so in the docuseries, juicetheseries.com, if I didn't mention juicetheseries.com. In our last episode, when we were in Japan a year ago, we interviewed a number of Japanese, including Nobuo Tanaka, who's the former head of the International Energy Agency. And Tanaka made this interesting point about, well, Japan is going to restart its nuclear reactors because it needs to for national security, for energy security, and therefore national security. And I'm paraphrasing what Tanaka said, but he said, we got China over here, we got Russia over here, we got North Korea over here. We live in a bad neighborhood. And it would not be a good signal for us to not reactivate our nuclear reactors, given where given this neighborhood that we live in. So, Japan is acting as a very rational actor, right? They are going to look after Japan's interests first. And so in every meeting that I went to we met with top government officials, industry officials, and in every meeting I said, well, what about climate change? What about the Kyoto Protocol? And in every meeting, the response was the same. Yeah, well, we're going to take energy security first. We're not too concerned about carbon emissions. And this was in Japan. So, there is a very serious, very rational approach to energy and power in Japan. Make no mistake.
And I loved how Tanaka talked about diversified sources of energy.
Yeah.
He really emphasized that.
Yeah.
Guys, on the whole team here, there's only about a 30-mile pipeline in order to connect Russia to China. And I think that we're going to lose China as an ally because we've stopped that pipeline several times. You would think you would want that whole pipeline coming from Russia and Russia's power coming out. You think we would be okay. Hey, yay, it's a good energy investment for that. Japan has to import all their power except for their nuclear. Any thoughts on geopolitical and Japan and pipelines?
I can't speak to the pipeline issue. What I can speak to is that Japan has taken a very long-term view on nuclear, and we saw that ourselves. JNFL, Japan Nuclear Fuel Limited, in the extreme north of Japan on the main island, they're building a nuclear waste repository, nuclear fuel reprocessing. They're taking a very long-term, very pragmatic approach to nuclear and the entire life cycle of nuclear power in Japan. And that's going to be something that's difficult to do here in the United States because we have such a diffused ownership of our electric utilities. In Japan, I think they have 11 in the whole country for 130 million people. They have 11 electric utilities. In the U.S., we have 3,000. So, Japan is just a very interesting country, but very pragmatic in their approach to energy and power.
Right.
I think
Patrick,
they don't have any other choice but to be pragmatic. They
Yeah.
have to keep the lights on.
They have to. Yeah.
I love that.
And they're an industrial economy. And then one of the reasons why they're building the coal and nuclear plants or coal and gas plants is in Tokyo, they were seeing electric prices of 50 cents a kilowatt hour. So, the people the politicians pay attention, right? They know what is going on. And that's where I think, when we look at Europe or even California now, I think there is some hope in the United States for rational policy because we can see, and in fact, in one of the episodes, we have John Constable, a Brit, saying, you have no reason to not pay attention to what we have done here. We've shown you what this can look like. You need to be paying attention.
Yeah, precisely.
Did you just say there's hope for California, Robert?
Only a little, Stu.
I was just checking. That's the Okie ear.
Only a very, very little.
Patrick puts out a good question. Billionaires' motivation to make more money. How many billionaires have we seen trying to become middle class?
And they should. That's what they're preaching, aren't they? Energy conservation, lower consumption of everything. Just try it.
Yeah,
Okay.
but these are people with multiple homes, and they again don't face any kind of deprivation. So this is one of the other parts of this that back to just why did I make this docuseries? Well, part of it was my own motivation of understanding. Well, I'm uniquely positioned in my career, right? I'm an old guy now. I'm 64 this year. and I had the experience and had some of the contacts and people that I knew, well, I could do this project. But what is my ultimate motivation? Who do I hope to speak for? Well, I hope to speak for people who are working class people, the people who turn wrenches for a living, the people who make things, grow things, build things. Those are the people that I really care about. And they are almost completely unrepresented in our political process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Same here.
In every country, in every Western country, it seems that that's the case.
Can we go back to this comment right here? Benefits of cheap, stable, and clean energy are diffuse and unlikely to motivate activism. I just don't agree with this at all.
Yeah, I think
first
you meant
of all,
nuclear.
renewables. Okay, nuclear. Okay, well that's good. I was going to say if this is about renewables, they're not cheap, they're not stable. Okay.
Yeah, because I think he was talking about nuclear earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, I think that there's a point there that he's making that I think is right, which is that we assume that we're going to have cheap, abundant, reliable energy and power, right? That it's been there. So that's this kind of assumption that it's there. So until you get to situations as in Europe where you see skyrocketing prices, people aren't going to get pissed off, right? So, but that's one of the things that I fear as well, is that it will take some massive crisis to make things, to get motivation, to make things happen, to change things here in the US, which I hope is not required, but I fear it is.
Oh, I think it definitely is. Because our 95% of the people on the street in the United States don't understand anything about any of this. And so they're not going to wake up until they have a crisis in which, well, could be very tragic.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, you bet. Hey, we got about 10 more minutes left, and I know that we've stolen a lot of folks' time here. Let me, David, can you get rid of that one comment? I can't see that here for a sec.
Oh, sorry.
Let me remove this.
There we go.
And we want to give a shout out to Meredith Anglin. We've got a couple questions in here. Alberta to ban some renewable energy projects. Green say move as uncertainty bomb. Did you have?
So I wanted to put that headline there because Reuters misrepresents it. So Alberta had a moratorium on renewable projects, new ones. And while they did a review to see what would be best for the province, because a lot of solar projects were going to take over agricultural land. And there are certain laws that if a wind or solar company go out of business, and sometimes they turn into number companies and go out of business, the landowner is responsible for decommissioning and recycling or disposing of the equipment. And the landowners didn't know that. So they did a review, they talked to the landowners, and they came up with a new system where there cannot be a wind project within 35 kilometers of a natural area, which is basically 73% of the province now can't have any more wind projects. And solar projects may not use agricultural land at all. And so the activists are upset, saying that this will throttle the transition in Alberta because it's preventing the wind and solar. But it's protecting the landowners, and it's protecting agriculture and the land. Yeah.
Well,
you gotta love the propaganda uncertainty bomb.
What is uncertainty bomb? It's a certainty.
I love that term.
It's interesting to see, if I can just interject quickly, because I've been tracking this for a long time. We talk about it in the docuseries, juicetheseries.com. But we talk about the backlash against wind and solar all across the U.S., and it has happened from Maine to Hawaii, and I've tracked it in the Renewable Rejection Database. In fact, I need to update it today with some more recent rejections or restrictions that have happened in Iowa. But this is happening all around the world, and in particular, and I think it was in Bulgaria, there were people that were arrested for falsifying records around agricultural land and solar projects. So this conflict between ag land and solar is happening all over the world, and it's a very practical approach by local people saying, hey, we have to eat. You can put these solar panels somewhere else, but you cannot take prime ag land. And yet that is one of the key issues that's happening here in the United States, especially. I was in Wisconsin a year ago talking to people in Christiana, Wisconsin. something like 7,000 acres of prime soybean land in central Wisconsin, or they want to pave it with a solar project. And the locals are saying, you're out of your effing mind.
Oh
Well
my
done.
gosh.
Could you
Well,
send
Robert,
me
can I-
this news about Bulgaria, because I knew this was going to happen, but I haven't heard it happening. I knew
Yeah,
there
let me, I presented on this just recently. Let me
was-
find
whenever. Sorry, Tammy.
Yeah, it was
Robert,
in
I just
Bulgaria.
want-
It was in Bulgaria. I can forward this slide I made, Irina, but yeah, it was in January. The Constitutional Court shut the door to solar farms on fertile land, ruled the installation of agri-photovoltaics on arable land is unconstitutional. And the court said arable land should only be used for agricultural purposes. That was in Euractiv in January.
Yeah, but I didn't think anyone got arrested.
That was last October that there were people were arrested for falsifying reports on ag land to make them viable for solar projects.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Robert, can I quickly ask a question?
Of course.
I love the part about the Osage Nation in episode 3 that you were talking about. And I'm wondering, is Enel appealing that ruling, or when are they actually going to start decommissioning those windmills?
Well, I can't answer the last part of that. And when they do, I am going to be there. I'm going to be there, and I'm going to be cheering along with my Osage friends, and my cousins and my family say they're going to be there too. And it's going to be a raucous good time. But of course, Enel is trying to appeal this, right? They're facing a bill of something like $300 million to take down the wind project. It'll cost them more to take it down than it did to put them up. They just filed a motion with the court in an effort to try and allow the wind turbines to stay in place with some cockamamie scheme. But remember, it's not just the removal of the turbines now. The tribe is also seeking compensatory damages, and they have a non-jury trial May 21st in Tulsa to determine those damages. And I asked the Osage Minerals Council, Everett Waller, he was on the Power Hungry podcast a few weeks ago. I said, so you're asking compensatory damages? He says, yes. And I said, what are you going to ask? And he said, well, how much are you asking for? And he says, I'm not going to tell you, but it rhymes with millions. So,
Oh my gosh.
Excellent. Excellent.
Robert, if you're there, I want to be there and have a live edition, because I think that this having a panel discussion there live would be absolutely
Absolutely.
I'm not sure who this one was. This was a big switch.
I think that was mine, wasn't it? That was a story about what it would cost to electrify all the heavy duty trucks in America, the 18-wheelers and other heavy trucks. You're going to have to expand the grid by 40% just to do the heavy trucks.
Wow.
Not including passenger vehicles. You're going to have to import 35 years worth of total global supply of lithium just to build the batteries. I mean, it's just everyone that's at what's it called? capitalpress.com. It's a great story. Everyone should read it. It is a real eye opener.
This one, wind turbines and solar panels are aging prematurely. Robert, this goes into, and Tammy and Irina and David, I'll tell you, the wind farms are not fiscally responsible. So how can they be called sustainable? From day one, the numbers that I've seen, and I got some great information from Meredith's husband. But the wind farms at 8 years are starting to go through again, and they're becoming maintenance nightmares. And I believe, Robert, you had been pointing out, if I can remember right, that the time that the Porculus bill, as Dan Bongino would call the Inflation Reduction Act, or the infrastructure bill, they start reworking these things at that time in order to ding the ratepayers. And I'm going to ask this question with this other one. The offshore wind bid that just came through again came in at what, 2 or 3 times the amount. I have to go look at the number yesterday that it was. So they canceled the first, nobody bid on it. And then they came back through and increased it. So the consumers are always getting these things. And all they're doing is increasing the price. Do you see the failure rate, the MTBF between all of these as being falsified or being misrepresented, team? This is a question for the whole team.
Well, I can speak just briefly to the wind issue, wind turbines. A lot of these turbines, they're being what it was called repowered. So they're keeping the original towers in place and putting new nacelles and new blades on them.
Yeah.
And doing so allows them to restart the clock on the tax credits. So again, this has nothing to do with climate change. It's all about the money. Exactly. And so meanwhile, the turbine blades are just being stacked up out in rural America. I did a TikTok on this that had over 160,000 views. It just did Sweetwater, Texas, just this massive dump site of wind turbine blades that's just being left out there for, and will not likely never be moved, never be recycled. But that's happening all across the country and been documented many times. As far as the solar trash and the solar panels, there was a Harvard Business School study that came out about 2 years ago that estimated that by 2035, 2040 or so, the amount of waste solar panels will exceed the amount of new panels coming into the market. So, I mean, there's a massive solid waste issue here that is not being addressed, and it beggars this whole idea of clean, green, renewable energy.
Can I add one point to this too? It's a real threat to landowners who are signing these contracts with the wind and solar companies. Your state doesn't have any regulatory structure requiring these companies to properly decommission and remove all this stuff from your land when their useful life expires, okay? It's not like the oil and gas business where you have a firm set of regulations and an agency policing the situation, and you have to plug and abandon those wells in the right way, or there's fines and penalties. We don't have that regulatory structure in Texas or any other state in this country governing wind and solar. So you're going to get stuck with the tab at the end of those projects' useful life.
Can I add something? The new Alberta rules, the wind and solar companies have to put money up front into an account for cleanup.
Nice.
Well,
that's another reason why they're angry. Because the same oil and gas has to do, wind and solar now has to do.
Right.
I saw an article that there was one of the ones requiring that, Tammy, and they said it has to be started to be put in 10 years. Well, these things are failing at 8. So, that one didn't seem very right next to failed EV. We've got just a few more minutes here, and there was a couple. Yeah. I hope I didn't get any missed stories by anybody. Let's see here.
Yeah, that's the last one. That's mine.
Okay.
Well, the headline speaks for itself. Despite all the new wind and solar capacity and everything, global energy-related CO2 emissions hit a record high. And you know how the IEA explains it? It explains it with droughts, which reduced hydropower output and made it necessary to increase generation from coal and gas. Interestingly, it also says that these droughts and underperforming hydropower accounted for around 40% of the increase. Without these 40% in increased emissions from the global electricity sector would have fallen in 2023. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the maths does not make sense. 60% of the increase came from elsewhere, such as probably energy demand that wind and solar could not satisfy. But the IEA is telling us that if these 40% of emissions increased emissions had not happened, we would have had a decline in total emissions. These people are at a stage where they do not hear themselves. That's it for me.
But it's part of their new mandate. It's part of their new mandate to generate studies and reports that are in alignment to push the energy transition.
It
So
makes no sense.
it makes no
It's
sense.
very neutral level.
I'll tell you what, guys, thank you. This has been just an absolute wonderful time. I've benefited a bunch from this, and I believe, Robert, This is the website. I just want to make sure that I did type it in correctly. Correct?
I'm not seeing. juicetheseries.com. Yes, thank you, Stu. Yes, juicetheseries.com. I think I mentioned juicetheseries.com. By the way, just to follow up on what Tammy said about what's happened in Alberta, Norton Rose Fulbright has a good summary of what the new policy issues for renewables or wind and alternative energy. I don't call them renewables. Alternative energy in the province of Alberta, which outlines that 35-kilometer setback, which is, in my view, one of the most stringent regulations ever adopted against wind energy in the world. I mean, it's a major decision. And Norton Rose, make it clear, this law firm does a lot of work on wind and solar permitting and so on.
Real quick, we will also have this on theenergynewsbeat.substack.com, but also David Blackmon's as well, and any of the other team. We also have it. You can listen to this on Energy Realities podcast. And so that has been going off just crazy around the world. We have quite a worldwide following there, and it has just been a true honor. Last word to you, Robert.
Well, thank you again. I admire all the work that all of you are doing. Irina's been on the Power Hungry podcast and is one of the stars of the European journalism business. So a real pleasure to be on today. Let's do it again. I love talking about this. These issues are my purpose and my passion. I don't play golf. I'm not retiring. This is what I do. So I could talk about it easily for more than an hour, but it's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, Tammy, any last thoughts?
It flew by today. Holy cow.
Irina, any last thoughts?
No, except that it was a real pleasure to have Robert and to talk about all this. And all I could do is basically nod and say yes. That's exactly the way I feel too.
And David, I just heard Robert victimize himself and say, hey, he'd be back. So yes.
Yes. We'll hold you with that.
Thank you to all the folks that have chipped in. We do appreciate it. And the reviews on this are going to be in there. Subscribe to Robert, David, and Tammy, and also Irina. Thank you for everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
Thanks. Have a great week, everyone.